to the Greenville County Library System's Southern Author Expo. I'm Rachel, the Adult Outreach and Event Coordinator for the Library System, and I'm so excited that you've joined us on this chilly afternoon to hear from some of your favorite Southern authors. Now, if you've ever attended our in-person expo, this is going to recreate that feel just from the comfort of your home. You'll hear from all of the authors and then get a chance to ask them questions. If you're watching this recording, you'll get to hear all of the questions from the live attendees. Now, what makes this extra special? It's the kickoff event for adult winter reading. So you can sign up right now by going to greenvillelibrary.org/winter reading. There you'll register, and then also you can download an activity booklet. Now you can print this off at home, or you can grab a printed copy from any library location. It's beautiful and it has lots of activities inside. The main one to complete the challenge is the bingo card. And one of the squares is attending this very event. So go ahead and mark that off at the end of the program. If you're watching the recording, that also counts, so mark that off as well. You can also complete a square by reading a book by a South Carolina author, so see if you can find a new book tonight that you might enjoy. You just have to complete a row in any direction, and then you've completed the challenge. We want to encourage all of our wonderful adult patrons to cozy up this winter, read for fun, and earn some prizes. An example of one of those prizes, this is a completion prize, is this fabulous winter reading tote. Perfect size for carrying your books. So that's a great excuse to come visit the library again. Another completion prize that you'll receive is also a pastry voucher from Swamp Rabbit Cafe and Grocery. Now, when you're entered into the grand prize drawings, there are a variety of those, including hockey tickets from Swamp Rabbit Hockey, tickets to Starry Nights at Roper Mountain Science Center, and also some plus activity packages with some winter night sky themed items. If you enjoy this expo, you'll love our upcoming Meet the Author events throughout winter reading. Those also help you complete a square on the bingo challenge. Suspense and thriller author Wendy Hurd will join us virtually on Zoom Tuesday, February 15th at 7 p.m. Romance author Denise Williams will be speaking with us via Zoom on Thursday, February 24th at 7 p.m. Local favorite Deb Richardson Moore will join us for a visit at Hughes Main Library on Tuesday, March 1st at 7 p.m. A recording will be made available of that one as well. And to wrap up winter reading, Anne B. Ross, author of the Miss Julia series, will give a virtual talk on Thursday, March 10 at 6:30. So the winter reading challenge lasts until March 15th, so you've got plenty of time to get those squares fulfilled. Make sure you register for all of these events and many, many more, including trivia, short story, book clubs, yoga, you name it, we've got it at greenvillelibrary.org/events. Now I'd like to welcome our selected authors for the expo. We're going to start off this event with each author briefly speaking about their work, their writing process, or getting published, and then we'll open the floor to audience questions. That's to you, our viewers. Now be sure to watch the chat for links to the author websites and their social media presence so you can learn more about them and purchase their books. If you're watching the recording, all of those links are in the video description below. Now let's begin our author features. Welcome, authors. Andrea Coates lived in Florida most of her life and graduated from the University of South Florida with a degree in education. She taught in elementary school for a total of 10 years. She also tutored during that time and still does. About 5 years ago, she and her family decided to move to Greenville. After she took leave from education to raise her 2 children, she decided it was a perfect time to try to create and self-publish her first children's book. This labor of love took a year to complete. What to Do When It Is Not Okay, a gentle book on childhood blues. This book is wonderful talking points to help children express themselves while engaging them with beautiful illustrations. Welcome, Andrea.
Well, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here. This is my first time, so sorry if I'm a little nervous, but as Rachel said, my name is Andrea. I have lived in South Carolina for 5 years and absolutely love it. My favorite thing to do is explore our beautiful downtown area. I am from Florida. I've lived there for 10 years. So go Bucks. I'm sorry, I lived there for 30 years, but I've taught for 10. And throughout that time, I have gathered a lot of great stories and interactions, and I wanted to transfer those interactions and relatable experiences into books. And my goal is to use these stories that I've gathered from my elementary and middle school kids and help children, just empower them to find their strength and confidence and inner awesomeness, as well as just including messages of embracing diversities and cultures and spreading appreciation. I think it's really never too early to learn about loving yourself and being proud of who you are. So if I can do that through these books, then I consider what I'm doing a total success. And speaking of books, my first book, What to Do and It's Not Okay, a gentle book on childhood blues, is a story about, the way I describe it is, if you have a bubble right in front of you, this is your baseline. So if someone asks you how you are, you usually say, I'm good, I'm fine. And we know kids usually give us that one-worded answer. And so this is your baseline. And throughout the day, some instances might happen to make your emotion in your baseline zoom, like a birthday party, anxiety about studying for a test, or passing the test, failing the test, going to your favorite class, your sibling taking your favorite toy or breaking it. So you have all these things that just interrupt your baseline for a little bit, but like a yo-yo, a lot of it comes right back. My book picks up with a character who something happened and they're stuck out here in their unwanted emotion. And this book takes you on a journey as the main character tries different ways to get back to their baseline. That way they can continue to try to fix whatever's wrong. I see this a lot as I have taught, spending so much time with everybody's little one, where they'll come to school and something's wrong and it's hard for them to concentrate. It's hard for them to continue through the day. So I always made it a point in my classroom to show students, kids, different ways to handle their emotions so they can figure out how to get back to their baseline. And the great thing about my book, besides the wonderful illustrations, is that for this book and for all of my books, here's my book, I select 2 pages throughout the book where your little one can become the illustrator, and they can color the book as they see fit in their world. Really trying to hit on that, really being very relatable. I hope that everyone enjoys the book. I have many more coming. I have my website. Let me see if I can share real quick, where they can go. On my website, there's a button to buy the book, but the great thing is you can download the coloring pages. And I do have an extra one right from the source, and they can always mail or take a picture and email the pictures back to me so I can include it. I've had a couple of schools have this book, and they have presented it to their classrooms, and I've had great student feedback and parent feedback, so I'm very excited about the whole process. It took about a year to from start to finish to self-publish. And that's about it.
Thank you, Andrea. We appreciate that. I see some questions are coming into the chat. That's fantastic. Andrea will be able to answer those in a moment when we get to the Q&A time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we have Tim Davis. Tim Davis has worked as a professional illustrator and published author for over 3 decades. The most prolific Hidden Pictures illustrator in Highlights Magazine's history, Tim teaches workshops for the iconic children's magazine to train others in the art of hidden pictures creation. He's written and illustrated 12 children's books, the Mice of the Herringbone series, was 5 books, and the Tales of Dust River Gulch series, 2 books. The Island Rule and the Island Rules, and 3 mushroom-themed books, Mort and the Sour Scheme, Mort Finds His Roots, and Mort's Circle. Tim regularly teaches writing and illustration in elementary schools through the Smart Arts program of the Metropolitan Arts Council. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Just a little bit before I get going here. I have a presentation. You know, I've always, as you mentioned, I do a lot of stuff in schools. So I thought I'd just give you a little bit of the taste of what I do with kids in elementary school. And that will tell the story of some of the writing I've been doing recently. Okay, just a little bit here. That picture on the right is something that a mom sent me, and I always really appreciate it when parents or teachers send me something, a picture of their kids enjoying books that I've written or published. So I'll put that up there to start things out. But I published a sequel to this book, The Island Rule, in November. And there's kind of a story behind that, which should be an encouragement to writers out there. So let me give you a little about that. But when I start, I like to start with some kind of sense of an order in the story. There's a baseline of the way things are. And then we go from there. Things get chaotic. And then the chaos kind of falls apart because of some actions of the characters. And then at the end, the order's a little better than it was before. That's sort of the general way I like a story to work. So this is a story line for when I'm just going to talk about in a minute here. A story that didn't quite work because for a long time, the story had a solid baseline and it didn't have this chaos in the middle. So I had some help. And the best place to find help in my mind is at coffee shops, because there's always somebody there who can give you a good idea, somebody can share with you, and sometimes it's the barista. So this fellow right here in the middle picture, named Ethan, is a barista over at Leopard Forest and Travelers Rest, and he's gone now, he's moved on to another job, but he, as a kid, had read my mice books that are published from several years ago. And so he asked me one time, have you ever written any more books in that series? And I kind of was a little bit embarrassed because I thought, well, yeah, I have, but it's not published because it's just not good. It's just, there was something wrong with it. I would put it up in my attic, and then every once in a while I'd find it and I would read it, and it would be good for the first half and then it just flattened out. And it was because it didn't have enough chaos in it. So Ethan here helped me out. He said, take it out of the attic. I'm going to help you fix the book. So how much more help can you get from a barista than that? Not only do you get coffee, but he actually helped me get my book published. So here we are after the book got published. I gave him some credit on there, dedicated to him. And then I actually, when I released the book, and this is at TR Makers where I usually sell my books, a pirate actually happened to be in the parking lot. Now, how often does that happen? And the book has pirates in it. So I asked him to come on in to hold my book up. And it turned out that I knew his dad from way back. It was kind of cool. Who knew that would happen? So it had kind of an interesting turn of events, but it took 15 years from the time I first wrote the book to the time it got fixed, and then I self-published this one. So the second book in a series, after a while, I thought, okay, once you write one, you have to think, will I write 2 and then 3? So the second one, I had an idea, and since I have a lot of association with highlights, as was mentioned in the intro, I decided to go to this workshop, and you can see me in the back there. And I was interested in it because it has to do with writing things that have scientific content. And that sounds a little intimidating, but it really was more like, is there science in the book? And I do have a lot of science in this book. So they gave me a lot of ideas. I started it right there at that workshop. Also met a very interesting guy. He's from the islands, which was perfect. His name is Baptiste. He became a good friend of mine there. And he gave me a lot of stories about island life, which were very helpful to me. So here's the 2 books out here with my coffee, working on it, and the coffee cup is from the workshop. So this book is a little different because a lot of it takes place underground. I wanted to explore what things are like in the dark, in the caves, and that's where a lot of the science comes in. So we have maps of the island, we have the underside of the island, and that has a big part in the way the story plays out down in the caves. So there's a lot of things about caves. When I do this in schools, we talk about the different kind of formations there and move on to that. These are actually glowworms in a certain kind of cave. And in this book, they have glowworms in the cave, and they kind of simulate the starry night sky. So that becomes a part of the story as the turtle learns some things about the constellations. So here I am doing this presentation in a school. You can see it's very similar, much a little longer than what you got, but I spent a lot of time talking about the whole process of storytelling and help the kids understand how their story needs to follow a line that goes from order to chaos to something better than it was at the beginning. And we also work into that hidden pictures, which is kind of a fun thing to work into the story. They do some illustrations and then we turn them into hidden pictures. And as I mentioned, I work with Smart Arts Integration. I saw that Andrea had been a third grade teacher, so I thought I've taught with a lot of third grade teachers. So this is throughout Greenville County. So if that's something that you are interested in, if you're a teacher, or if your school would want to do something like this, you can let me know. And I'll put this contact information in the chat in a little bit. But that's basically what I wanted to share with you from the presentation. It's been a fun thing. There are a lot of books out there, some of them old and some of them new. So I have been enjoying working with that. And I see a couple questions. Should I wait on those then, Rachel?
We'll wait on those and get
Okay, I'll get back to those. All right, thanks.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Welcome.
That was fascinating. I loved the glowworms. So next up, we have J. Dwight Donald. Dwight is a poet and author with a collection of poetry published in 2018 called Annular. He's also a columnist with work appearing in USA Today, the Greenville News, the State, and Charleston Post and Courier. He's also written several short stories. We're so glad that you can join us today, Dwight.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the Greenville County Library System for accepting my application. There have been a lot of people that have poured into me to make me the writer that I am. I'm still in the process of becoming a writer. But I would like to thank Robin Bryant, Gerald Jackson, and Selby Cobb for providing critical insight and critique of my work throughout my writing process. I would like to thank Dr. Butler Bruton, who is retired professor emeritus at Montclair State in New Jersey, who inspired me to write poetry. Gessler Hausman, who has helped me to self-publish. She Gessler attended the University of Vienna in Austria, and also to my wife, Crystal, who has given me undying support. There are many more, but due to time constraints, I don't have time to highlight everybody. But I started out my writing career as a letter writer. I would write letters to the paper wherever I went. If I went on a vacation, I would give my views of the town where I stayed. And I've had several dozens of my letters published by the papers. And eventually I evolved into a columnist. And somewhere in between, poetry found me, inspired by Dr. Butler Bruton. Annular is my first collection of poems. Annular it talks about my life in middle school up until now. It comes 360. That's what annular symbolizes. It's an annular eclipse. Annular means ring. I would like to read a few poems from my book, if you will. The first poem I would like to read is Hands. And Hands is dedicated to my sister-in-law, Jacqueline. Jacqueline cared for her mother and father as their health declined. And I witnessed her when I go over, she'd be over every day, making sure they were fed, making sure they were clothed, making sure all their necessities were taken care of. So my wife said, her birthday, why don't you write a poem for Jackie? And so I wrote this poem for Jackie. It's called Hands. I've seen your hands as they cared for your father, and now your mother. Hands that have generosity written in each palm. There is an abundance of kindness in your hands. Hands with wave, point, hoist, and pray. hands not made by man, but by the maker. I've seen your hands as they pick tomatoes or wipe dust off of a neglected table, ever so mindful to the task at hand, present in the fading moment. Your hands hold our past and present at the same time, showing us from whence we come and where we stand. Hands of a heroine, saving lives and inspiring souls. Hands that clap in church, that care for a patient, that snap green beans and cook collard greens. Helping hands that heal our land. This next poem I would like to share with you describes our country, our nation, the state of our fragmented country, and it's called Crucible. We stand on a precipice, or near it, a cacophony of pleading, railing, hoping, a strident rainbow coalition, a spectrum of promise waiting on fulfillment. Not yet one among many, but a penny, divided among nickels, dimes, quarters, and oh yes, the almighty dollar. We are a choir singing off key, devoid of harmony, a writer searching for his voice, a proposal waiting on an answer. Standing on this precipice, we look down into a crucible where an array of metals mix, meld, and mold into an unknowable known. An experiment framed in hope and a justified belief in forging one's destiny is in this pot, boiling and spilling over onto the burner. This last poem I would like to share with you is a poem one of my favorite poems. And the poem is called Sankofa. And Sankofa is a Kwan Twi language of Ghana. And it means to go back and get the things that are of value to you, to bring into the future so you can know where you're going, specifically your history. And I had a buddy of mine to lay down a track for me on the djembe drums because I wanted the ambiance of the continent of Africa. It is not wrong to go back and get that which you have forgotten. Let us go back and reclaim what is ours. Let us embrace those past civilizations upon the Nile River. Remember and reflect on the great empires of Mali, Ghana, Songhai, Pompeii, science, mathematics, medicine, architecture, spirituality, and the foundations of society began among these empires and cultures. History will have one believe that no great achievements were ever produced by the descendants of the African diaspora. He who controls the pen of history has left our story untold. From a distant past, the voice of Imhotep, the multi-genius and high priest, is calling out to us. Kings and queens implore us to invoke their names. The pyramids testify to their greatness. The great Sphinx of Giza to their brilliance. But our ancestors from not too long ago also beckon us. One can hear the blues emanating from Muddy Waters and Etta James. Jazzy and sophisticated rhythms pouring from Charlie Parker and Lady Day. Ellison, Wright, Baldwin have left their legacy on printed page. Malcolm, Medgar, Martin, martyrs to a dying age. But we must step out of our gloomy past and walk into the white gleam where our wondrous bright stars cast. Our children and future generations will have a greater sense of self-worth and self-awareness if we go back and get what we got. Sankofa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dwight. That was beautiful. Next up, we have Barbara Evers. So Barbara V. Evers is the author of the epic fantasy trilogy, The Watchers of Manaya, The Watchers in Exile, and The Watchers at War. Her debut novel, The Watchers of Manaya, won the Best Fantasy Novel Imagine Award in 2021. She's a Pushcart Prize nominee and writes about her passions, including giraffes, other endangered animals, strong women, and domestic violence. A two-time Carrie McRae winner, her short stories and essays have appeared in the best-selling anthology Child of My Child, Poems and Stories for Grandparents, the Pettigrew Review, the Moonshine Review, and Stupefying Stories. When she's not writing, Barbara is a public speaker, workshop designer, and corporate trainer. In addition, she enjoys contributing her teaching skills to the creative writing community and has taught several workshops at conferences and special events. She has a Master of Arts in Professional Communication and a Bachelor of Arts in Zoology. In other words, she knows how to communicate with animals, which is great since her works often include animal characters. Barbara serves the creative writing community in many ways, including judging writing contests, reading slush pile, freelance editing, and contributing to multiple blogs, including 2 of her own. Barbara leads the Greenville chapter of the South Carolina Writers Association and has served on that board of directors multiple times, including as president of the board. Barbara lives in Greer, SC with 2 of her grandchildren, her husband Bruce, and a rescue dog named Roxy. As always, and with all of the authors, the links to follow Barbara or to purchase books will be in the chat. So be sure to be checking that chat for every author. Welcome, Barbara.
Hi, thank you for having me here. I'm so excited to be part of the Southern Authors Expo with Greenville County Library this year. Hey, everybody. I saw some names of people I know in the list of that. It makes my heart feel good to know some of y'all are there and supporting me. You might notice my backdrop back here. I have the trilogy behind me. So I'm going to try to lean right where. There's the first book, The Watchers of Mania. And then in the second book, that's going to be harder to uncover, but let's see, this way. There, The Watchers in Exile and The Watchers at War. The Girl on the Giraffe, if you have a question about that, we can talk about it later. It really doesn't happen like that in the book, just going to say that. Let me tell you a little bit about The Watchers of Mania and my process of getting this published, because you often hear about people who, it seems like they're an overnight success story. I finished writing the first 2 books 12 years before I got the books published. And when I found my publisher, he wouldn't publish me until I'd written the 3rd book. So the deal was, get the 3rd book written, and then he's a small publisher, so his deal is the sooner we can get a full series out, the better we can get it out to people. They want to read the full series. So I had to write the 3rd book, and then we went from December 2020, the first book came out, January 2021, the 2nd book came out, and March 1st, 2021, the 3rd book came out. So boom, 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 boom. Anyway, so that was pretty exciting, but it was a long time coming. And if you're a writer, I want you to just know, don't give up, because there is an audience out there. You've just got to find the right publisher. New Mythology Press that picked me up did not exist when I first finished writing these books. So there you go. I had to wait for him to come along. But let me tell you a little bit about it. I'm going to tell you kind of my tagline for the story, and then I can give you a little bit more about it. But you have a warrior princess, you have a dying queen, you have a traitor returned from the dead, and a shocking deathbed command. Oh, and telepathic giraffe. You cannot forget the giraffe. So I kind of love the fact that I followed the gentleman before us, because I loved your poem with the drums and everything. And although my story is in a fantasy world, it's not on Earth. It is a world, the Kingdom of Mania is a world more patterned after Africa than like the European world you see in most fantasy, especially epic fantasy. So, I mean, I've got giraffes, y'all. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit different than your typical dragons and medieval stuff. But anyway, the idea behind the Watchers is these are warrior women who have been gifted by the Creator with a keen sense of vision. So they can discern details extensively. They can read the horizon and know danger's coming. They can recognize the smallest little discrepancy that has changed. They also have visions and prophecies. Some of them are dream, and sometimes they are awake when they happen. They are excellent archers. Their vision helps them have incredible aim beyond what the normal person would have. And the Kingdom of Manaya is a matriarchy. So one of the things that I've discovered as I write, that I write about matriarchy. And that didn't happen on purpose, it just happened. But I write about matriarchies and strong women. And I usually put animals in there. And in this case, the giraffe have a telepathic connection with the royal family. And there's this whole relationship based on the fact that the giraffes were dying out, which by the way, in the real world they are, that they were dying out, and the Kingdom of Manaya, the royalty there, made an agreement with them that if they helped save the giraffes from dying out, then the giraffes would always bond with royal family. And so each member of the royal family has a giraffe they bond with. So what happens to Donna is she's not old enough to reign yet, but her mother's dying, and a prophecy foretold of this traitor coming back from the dead and gunning for her throne. So her mother issues this deathbed decree, sending her away to the Kingdom of Elvar, which is their ally, where she will be protected until she can come back and reign at age 18. So that's 3 years. 3 years separated from her watcher training, 3 years in a kingdom that is mountains and forests and high walls, so she feels blinded somewhat. She's kind of a fish out of water now. 3 years in a patriarchy instead of a matriarchy. 3 years where the women don't wear, leggings and tunics and carry weapons. They don't fight. Their battles in the, in the drawing room. So she's trying to struggle with all of this. She's separated from her giraffe. The telepathic bond is painful at that distance. So she's trying to deal with that. And meanwhile, this traitor is making inroads after her kingdom and 3 other kingdoms. So you have the Watchers of Manaya, that's the first book. We meet Adana and the characters in Manaya and the other 3 kingdoms. So we kind of gather the characters in the first book, and chaos ensues. I'm glad Tim brought that up. In the second book, The Watchers in Exile, this is when she's trying to return to take her throne, and you kind of get a clue. Exile might give you an idea of what happens there, definite chaos. And so we scatter everybody to the winds. And then in the third book, The Watchers at War, is when the big battles come. Interestingly enough, this series, when I wrote it, I aimed it for women in their 20s and 30s. And I have been amazed at the age range of people who are reading these books. I had a person send me a picture of their 9-year-old daughter reading the first book the other day. That blew my mind because that's a 96,000 word book. But their 9-year-old daughter was reading it. I have a friend whose 11-year-old granddaughter's read all 3, just ate them all up. I have had Vietnam veteran military guys contact me and say, I love your books, I love your books, I love your books. So, I mean, everywhere in between, from 11 to in their 80s, men, women, children, it's been amazing. The other thing I want to tell you about is that I do give 5% of my royalties to giraffe conservation. And I'm going to share real quick here. And I think I got my website up first. So let me bring that up, my website. So here's my website, barbaraevers.com. It gives you a little bit about me. There's my blog post. Notice I'm advertising this. You can sign up for my newsletter over here on the left. Tells you about the book. You can see some of my other things. There's some other links to Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, my business, and so forth. This is the Giraffe Conservation Foundation's website. And giraffes are endangered, and we don't hear enough about it because we hear all about the elephants. But statistics prove there are 4 elephants in the wild for every giraffe in the wild. So it's a major, major issue. And I connect with the Finney's who run Giraffe Conservation Foundation. Go to my YouTube channel. There's actually an interview between me and Stephanie there. But anyway, I'm going to stop sharing there and stop because I know that Rachel's there. Hi. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. We appreciate it. I think we all learned something here today too. So thank you so much for sharing. Next, we have Emily Golis. Emily Golis has been dreaming up fantasy worlds since before she could write her name. A New England transplant now living in the Deep South, she's fascinated by how culture shapes the way individuals see the world. Her first novel, Escape to Vendor, debuted in 2017 and won the CELA Award for Young Adult Fiction. Its sequel, Mists of Paracosmia, followed in April 2019. Golis aims to create stories that engage, inspire, and reassure readers that the small choices of everyday life matter. She lives in Taylor, South Carolina with her true love and two active little boys, and they all have grand adventures exploring the forests and mountains of the Carolinas. Welcome, Emily.
Hello. Thank you. All right. So as Rachel said, I'm Emily Golis. I'm actually from New England and moved down here 20 years ago. And I don't want to go back to New England. So it's nice, but I like more reasonable weather. Yes, so I have two books. They are a fantasy duology. That is a word for a trilogy that only has two books. So the first one, Escape to Vendor, is about a girl who creates her own imaginary fantasy world and then gets stuck inside of it. And once she's in, she no longer can control the world, and there is some sort of monster that's trying to hunt her down. The second book is the sequel, Mists of Paracosmia. It takes place several years later, and it's about her brother Arden, who ends up in his sister's world, and people's memories are being wiped, and like entire people groups are going off the grid, and he has to figure out what's going on, while also trying to figure out how to get back home. So they are originally written for young adult, kind of younger end of young adult, middle school. But I found a lot of my readers are in their 20s and 30s. So just goes to show, it's because the writing style isn't necessarily like for children. It's clean, but it's a writing style that all ages can enjoy. And then the themes are things like self-confidence and like finding your place and figuring out where you fit in the world. And so turns out more than just middle schoolers like those themes. So I've got a lot of adult and young adult readers as well. So because the premise is a girl creates her own fantasy world, world building is kind of a thing that's important to both the storyline and then just me as a creative. The world of Vendor has 12 people groups in it because I kind of went overboard because this was my fantasy world for about 15 years or 10 years before the book got published. So I've been doing a lot of world building with that. Not all those people groups fit in here. So don't, it's just, there's a lot of people groups beyond what you see. You get a different taste of different cultures. And I've got different, creatures. I've got centaurs, I've got goblins, I've got some merfolk. And then I have different cultural influences because it's someone from our world who creates another world. She gets, it's kind of like a Neverland, where you've got different groups of people all just kind of impossibly next to each other. So you've got like these people who are kind of like the samurai feudal system in Japan, like right next to this city based off of Timbuktu in medieval Africa. So just sort of a hodgepodge of building. One of the things that I really am interested in is culture building, and that's not just what people wear and what people eat, although I'm really interested in what people eat. That's kind of like, where do they get the apples from? Where do they get the tea? Like I've spent a lot of time doing research on that, which probably my readers don't care, but I care. And so, but it's really not just that, but the worldviews that different people have. So for example, if you have to choose, is it better to, if you're a young person and you want to go pursue your dream, but it means leaving your family behind, do you choose to go follow your dream, or do you stay and support the family business? And for us as Americans, we're going to say, oh, you go out and follow your dream. But there are other cultures where they said, no, you stay home with your family. And that's a value difference that different people have. And so I really enjoy taking cultures, taking people from these different cultures that are inspired by differences in real world cultures, differences in how people view, time and punctuality versus, making sure everybody arrives before you start the party. Taking those kinds of differences and then taking people from opposite types of cultures and then putting them right next to each other and having them learn, how do I understand this person without just being like, well, they're just stuck up, or they're, where they have to try to understand each other's cultures, but then also find out how to honor the other person's culture while not losing touch with their own. And so a lot of stories have opposite culture people being mashed together in a sort of emergency or dangerous situation. So I love to chat about culture. I love to chat about like different places that people can live. And I love stories, I love questions about food. So hit me up with questions about noodles and, where apple trees come from and that sort of thing. I'm going to continue working in the world of indoor for a while. I'm working on a secret project that I can't talk about right now. So, but it's also in the world of indoor. So my website is worldofindoor.com if you want to find out. It's sort of an interactive website where you can find out about the different people's groups, and there's sound design, and I'm not going to pull it up right now because I don't know how the sounds are going to work over Zoom. It might sound kind of weird, but you can check that out. And again, I love questions about fantasy, world building, culture, all that sort of thing.
Great. Thank you, Emily. That was wonderful. Thank you for letting us get into your thought process a little bit more there. And we got a sneak peek that something secret is in the works. We always like to get. All right, so next up we have Alan Scott Henderson. Scott Henderson was born and raised in West Palm Beach, Florida. A former middle school social studies teacher, he's currently a professor in Furman University's education department. He's the author of nonfiction books published by Columbia University Press and the University of Tennessee Press, 22 articles and book chapters, 49 book reviews. In addition to nonfiction, he's published a poetry collection, Gin and Gardenias, which focuses on his experiences as a gay boy and then man living in the Southeast United States. When not teaching and writing, he enjoys painting, playing the trumpet, and photography. He's lived in Greenville, South Carolina since 1995. Welcome, Scott.
Hi there, Rachel. I first of all want to thank the Greenville County Library System, particularly Adult Program Services, for hosting this event this afternoon. I'd particularly like to thank you, Rachel, for all of your work coordinating it. I'd like to thank my fellow panelists. And finally, I'd like to thank the participants who are viewing this session remotely, because your contributions in the chat have already really enriched the afternoon. As Rachel noted, I'm originally from South Florida, but have lived in Greenville for approaching 3 decades. Also spent 4 years in Tallahassee, Florida, and my mother's side of the family is from Southeast Georgia. So the notion that we're all talking about or setting some of our fictional worlds in and around the South really resonates with me. I'd like to take just a few minutes today to talk about what precipitated my collection of poems and how I go about or went about writing them. In 2010, I lost my partner, and all of a sudden, the we became an I. And I had to ask the question, who was I? Just happens coincidentally that my partner died. I had to give the order to take him off life support the day after our 24th anniversary. So the question, who was I, was not a question I'd asked for quite some time. And I had to confront the fact that I was now a middle-aged man. I was a gay middle-aged man, and I was a gay middle-aged man in the Deep South. And that required a lot of introspection, or as my many therapists would say, a lot of processing. And the way I began that was I took a photo of myself when I was 5, 6 years old, and without much thinking, and as Dwight said, and it really touched me, poetry found me. I just started writing a poem to my 5 or 6 year old self. I think Andrea talked about bass lines being interrupted, and Emily noted the phrase, no longer in control of my world. Well, I started communicating with my self 50 years younger to try to regain some of that control. And what ended up resulting after almost 5 years, it was a verse memoir. 68 poems that constitute essentially a biography, an autobiography from my perspective, of who I was becoming and who I might be in the future. The name of that collection is Gin and Gardenias, a memoir of desire, love, and loss. I began sifting through the chaos I felt that I was in. Tim mentioned that, and I love that graphic chaos because many of my poems emerge from nothing except chaos. I began with the present me and worked in 2 different directions, back into the past and then forward, because it was taking me so darn long to write these poems that the future was becoming the present. I'll just take 30, 45 seconds to talk about how I go about writing poetry. Often it's an abiding image, to use a little language of the craft. So some image will come to me, but more often than not, I'm just an absolute lover of language. And some phrase, some word will come to me, and that will inspire me. In particular, with this memoir, a word that maybe my partner and I really loved. And my only other sort of guideline is people must be able to understand my poems. I discovered very quickly that individuals were hesitant to read them because they thought I would quiz them on what it meant, and their experiences were deeply embedded in negative interactions with teachers who taught them that poetry was about decoding something. And my poetry is not like that at all. Finally, I related to what Barbara said about audiences sort of shifting or surprising you. I found that I was surprised that high school students actually have taken to the memoir, as have heterosexual women. Those were 2 audiences I was not aiming for. I honestly, by the time I got to the point where I thought I had a collection to publish, I wanted to memorialize a certain part of the LGBTQ past that not many or most of the young adult queer generation now knows much about. I'll end by saying that I have shifted from poetry to short stories because I mistakenly thought that perhaps that would be easier. That was the 1,000th millionth wrong suspicion that I had. But my first short story is now finished, and it is searching for a venue for publication. Did I say that my short story is looking for a venue for publication? At any rate, it is a delight being here this afternoon, and I look forward to hearing from my panelists, as well as looking through the chat section for more questions.
Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you for sharing your personal journey. And I saw a couple comments in the chat that they'd never heard of a poetic autobiography before. So thank you for opening our eyes, and best of luck with finding that publisher. Next, we have an interesting situation. Our guest actually edited an autobiography. So the author of Resisting Jim Crow is John McFall, who was born in 1878, 15 years after emancipation. He was the first of 11 children born to a freed couple in Charleston, South Carolina. He entered the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy before completing high school. After obtaining a doctor of pharmacy with honors in 1899, he returned to Charleston and opened a drugstore. Dr. McFall had spent his boyhood in a Charleston that was racially tolerant. He now witnessed Charleston evolve into a city of Jim Crow. African Americans no longer had rights of full citizenship and were expected to accept daily humiliations. For 4 decades, Dr. McFall pioneered activities to resist Jim Crow's encroachments on the education, medical care, and civic standing of the Black community. Our guest is Lenise Hollister, who is Dr. McFall's grandniece. She became aware that Dr. McFall wrote a book while researching the McFall family history. She finally found Dr. McFall's manuscript in the Fisk University Special Collection archives. Though Dr. McFall did not intend its publication, Lenise believes that Dr. McFall's voice needs to be heard and has relevance to today's issues about race in America. Thank you for joining us, Lenise.
Thank you for having me, and I want to also thank the Greenville County Public Library for hosting this event. And I also want to thank, I know I have some of my friends and family out there. I want to thank them for their support. They know who they are. Unlike, as Rachel said, unlike the other members of this panel, I did not write this book, Resisting Jim Crow. It was my granduncle, John McFall. In the early part of my researching my family, I came across something in his obituary that said that he had been writing a document, that he was writing a document. And so I would say since 2010, when I started my research, I was always kind of looking out for whether or not I could find it or not. And finally, in about 2017, 2018, I would have to say it found me. And I decided, even though he did not want it published, in fact, he says specifically not that he was not interested in having this document published. After reading it, I just found it to be so unique, so fascinating, and so timely that I went ahead and decided to publish it. And it has indeed been a labor of love. So I said that it was unique, and one might say, so what is it that makes it unique? And I would say that for the time that he was writing, when John was born in 1878, his parents, grandparents, great-grandparents had been free for 15 years and had taken on the responsibilities of citizenship. So he was the firstborn in the family of being free. And instead of moving on from there, John and his generation ended up having to face a life of frustration, sometimes of violence, because of white supremacy, because of Jim Crow, and also legalized segregation. So what's fascinating about him is that even before deciding or finishing high school, John decided to go off and aspire to an advanced degree. He decided that he was going to go to the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy. He was accepted there, and then he had to figure out how to pay for it, and he had to figure out how to get there. Imagine sitting down with his father, and he describes this in the book, and that's what's so interesting about the book is he didn't just say, oh, I think I'll go off to the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy and then say, I worked hard, got my degree, and move on from there. No, he describes the conversation he had with his father, who by this time had about 9 children. He then had to figure out how he was going to actually get to Philadelphia from Charleston. He explains what he put into his trunk. It was a 3-year program in Philadelphia. He describes the items he put into his trunk. He describes how he had to find a job. He found a job as a waiter aboard a steamship that was going to New York. And he got the job, describes his work as a waiter. But what you need to know is that John had never been a waiter, nor had he ever been in a restaurant or formal dining room. So his story of how he actually worked his way as a waiter to New York is actually quite a poignant story, but it also made me laugh out loud at times. Why is this story timely? This story is timely because another part of John's story is when he was also faced with a pandemic, and that was the 1918 pandemic. And by this time, John had seen cholera, smallpox, malaria, dengue fever. Charleston was not a healthy place. He was he owned a drugstore at this time. People lined up to get prescriptions filled. People, men, women, and children were dying after a brief illness. There were Barbadian laborers, contract laborers, who worked for the Charleston Navy Yard, who were dying without medical care in their bunks. These are things that we get to experience because of the way John tells his story. Readers, I think, who read about John will like him. The readers whom I've spoken to, even though this book has only been out since November, tell me that they really like John. And, you know, I'm not really surprised to hear that. If you're a history nerd like I am, and he brings up people who he crossed paths with, such as Frederick Douglass, Robert Smalls, Richard T. Greener, Paul Laurence Dunbar, just to name a few. I mean, it's actually thrilling to hear his encounters with these people. When John writes his story, you don't feel as though he's an older man looking back on his history or where his life was. You feel as though he's living it right then. Even as a child, you feel like as though you're right there with him. In 1938, the Post and Courier reported on a speech that John gave, and he said that racism was a cancer on this country. And so I think to myself that if John were alive today and read the newspapers, he really might not be very surprised by what he would read. I go back to the point that John did not write this manuscript for us. He wrote it for his adult children. And I respect that a great deal. However, I hope that you will find a place on your book stack that you keep next to your bed for John's book. And I hope that you will read it and that when you're finished, that you'll be glad that I decided to publish it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lanice. That's incredible. What a wonderful tribute to what sounds like an extraordinary man. I don't believe anyone will regret it. Thank you. Our next author is D. John Jackson. John Jackson is the author of the best-selling book, What About Me? Walking the Tightrope as a Black Man in America. He is also a Fortune 50 leader and vice president with global responsibilities that include strategic planning, engineering, data science, and artificial intelligence. A creative visionary, he's an executive producer of documentary films, an author, a strategist, a futurist thinker, a lecturer, and a motivational speaker. His speaking topics are diverse and range from leadership and world history to emerging technologies, economics, and competition in the global marketplace. He's also the founder of 5J Entertainment, a storytelling company committed to educating, informing, entertaining, and promoting positive messages in different forms of media for African-American men and boys, people of color, women, and other marginalized groups. Its first film documentary, What About Me?, explores the untold, unheard, distorted, and misunderstood stories of Black men in America. So you can learn more at the websites that are being posted in the chat right now. John is an avid supporter of the arts and ardent promoter of STEM education, and we are so glad that he is with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure, Rachel. It's just so good to hear my fellow panelists and authors talk about many things. It's just really, really good. It's a privilege to be here. And I just thank you for the opportunity. I never count these things as short or count them as something that is frivolous, because anytime that you can share ideas, learn from others, it's just a rich experience as a part of life. So thank you so much. So with me, a lot of my writing and the whole path to getting to this book started with speaking. I'd spoken on various topics around the country, around the world, but specifically when I spoke to the issues relating to the human experience, people would say, you really need to write those things down. It's very, very important. And as life would have it, different experiences, different circumstances, and moving forth in my career, I felt it was time to start to share with others. So I wanted to tell my stories on a bigger stage. I wanted to reach more people. And so I formed the company 5J Entertainment. And as you stated, to not only communicate to folks through books, through documentaries, through other film media, whatever it took to get more information, more understanding out there. Hence, my first book, What About Me? Walking the Tightrope as a Black Man in America. It's a bit of an autobiography about my life, my experiences, but more importantly, it gets to what I thought and the experiences that I had to go through. As I worked on my documentary, What About Me?, which is now streaming on Amazon Prime Video, that video opportunity gives a broader perspective of what Black men have to experience. The book really hones in on my personal experience and then blossoms out to how other people are impacted. My desire to tell the story really stems from how my mom and dad raised me. My maternal grandmother always had this huge impact on my life. And one of the things they wanted to do and to make sure that I understood is that I would pour back into the world as a man the things that they had taught. And they were very simple: treating people right. It's the utmost essential part of who you are. Treating people right, giving respect with dignity, regardless of race, color, creed, gender, socioeconomic status, your national origin. Those things did not matter. First and foremost, you are a human. Today, we have so many labels, and I think people lose the common touch and lose the focus that we're all human beings first. So my parents, they poured that into me, and I felt incumbent that I poured back into the world. But the other thing that they poured into me was giving back. For whatever you achieve or you attain, it's extremely important that you reach back and help others who are less fortunate. Doesn't matter what they look like, doesn't matter where they come from. As you becoming a better human being, it's important for you to do that. So these are the things that really were impetuses for me to move forward. So I felt that I wanted to tell these stories, and I also wanted to tell the good, the bad, the ugly, and the indifferent, and the great, the things that I had experienced. The things that I experienced that I had to overcome, that I was able to circumnavigate. The way I look at it is that I've been very blessed, tremendously blessed. Now it's important for me to be a blessing. I have to play a part in various lives, whether they're young people, different races, different colors. What can I do to give back? What can I do to make this world a better place? So looking at that and utilizing my stories and trying to help others, the book, What About Me, really starts to talk about Black men and boys, because Black boys, they face so many challenges. Their paths are somewhat perilous. They're either misunderstood, they're unseen, they're unheard, or they're marginalized. And the global mass media always paints a very limited picture. They're either athletes, star athletes, they have to be star athletes, entertainers, or typically criminals. And that image, unfortunately, circulates around the world. And that's the stigma that is carried. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is, why not focus on the engineers, the scientists, the doctors, the carpenters? Why not focus on the bankers, the computer science guys? STEM. STEM is a very, very big thing for me. Science, technology, engineering, and math is extremely important. And then also entrepreneurial spirit. There are so many entrepreneurs out there who are doing great things. So I think that's very important. So I want to get those messages across. But ultimately, my goal is to educate, to encourage, and to inspire. As you read the book, you'll see that I start with Black men and boys, but again, it starts to travel and broaden and get wider. And you start to see that it's a book for all people. It's a book for all people relating to respect, leadership, courage, trust, inspiration, perseverance, encouragement, motivation, diversity, equity, inclusion, innovation, and the future. And as those things start to cascade through the chapters, the reader starts to feel that, wow, this applies to me. Hence, what about me? What am I going to do? How am I going to contribute? How do I make this world a better place? One of my goals is to really, again, help people to understand and see things through a different vantage point, having a different prism, starting to understand. In our world today, there's so much tribalism, there's so much fractionalism, there's so many partitions and all of these labels, as I stated earlier. What we have to do is how to understand what another person is experiencing. So from that point, if we're able to learn and to listen and to hear others, maybe this world can be a better place. For example, I've had people from all over the world send me pictures holding my book. I have a U.S. admiral in the Navy, an admiral who sends a picture to me and says, wow, this applies to me. There's a lady in Dubai. There's a gentleman in Winnipeg. I also had a call from Japan. People are saying, wow, this applies to me. And I remember one lady from Seattle, she said, John, this isn't just for people of color. This is for anyone who wants to have a better world. So I say, again, my goal ultimately is to let every reader know that your life matters. What you do and what you say is extremely important. Your dreams matter. How you dream, how you help others, how you contribute, all of that matters. So if that's the case, let us take a big action together. Let's not just read the book and put it down. Let's take the action together. Let's go out and make this world a better place for all. As a great man once said, we either live together as brothers and sisters or we perish as fools. I think there's a great world ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a powerful message. Appreciate so much that your goal is to inspire and to fight against that stigma. Thank you so much, John. All right, our author next is Jonathan King. Award-winning author Jonathan King has been writing about the fantastic and the impossible since he was 7 years old. His favorite thing to do is to take our mundane world, drop some weirdness into the mix, and see what happens. Jonathan lives in Greenville, South Carolina with his wife and 2 cat children. His YA novel, Morrigan, is available in ebook and paperback on Amazon. Of course, the links to the author websites, as always, are in the chat. And you can visit his website at jonathankingauthor.com. Welcome, Jonathan.
All right. Thanks, Rachel, and thanks for having me on. This is the first time I've done anything like this, so it's really, it's been awesome to hear everybody's work and just how many talented and creative people we have in this community. So my novel is a young adult urban fantasy called Morrigan. I've got a copy here. It may be backwards for you. It looks backwards to me, but basically, it's the story of Abel Whitaker. Abel is a preacher's kid who grew up in this like legalistic, very strict Baptist upbringing. His father kind of cared more about reputation than and how his family looked as like a pastor in his family, than actually being really good people. So Abel ends up like 17 years into his life. He's fed up with it all. He is disillusioned. He wants to get out of the situation. So when he meets the new girl in town who comes to a church picnic with her mother, he decides with her, we're going to run away together, get out of the situation. And there's just one problem. She is the Celtic goddess of war. And the woman who's claiming to be her mother is someone who's been holding her captive for the last 200 years. And she's not ready to let her little girl go. So Abel and Morrigan are now on the run across South Carolina, being chased by monsters from Celtic mythology. And it's just basically their story of that. So Morrigan is sort of in the vein of, say, the Percy Jackson series or American Gods by Neil Gaiman. It's sort of in the middle of those age ranges. But it's basically it's that flavor of, you know, gods and characters from Celtic mythology placed in like our modern day setting. It's set as sort of this road trip across South Carolina, going from the upstate to Charleston and back again. You get places like, you know, Rainbow Row shows up and Angel Oak, but also places as mundane as a laundromat and a cemetery. So it's kind of got a flavor of, you know, all of South Carolina, where I've lived my whole life. I decided to self-publish Morrigan because it really felt like it didn't have a home exactly in terms of like where to publish it. It felt too religious for secular markets and too secular for religious markets. So I self-published it myself and got it out there. And then it was really interesting to see how many different people it resonated with and what they got out of it. I think no matter whether you consider yourself religious or non-religious, you're going to find something to resonate with. There are themes of like making your faith your own, figuring out what you believe and why it's important to you, not just because of what you've been taught, but because why it's a value that you have. It's also about paradigm shifts when you believe a certain way and then you get out into the world and you see that maybe it doesn't always work that way. And there are even themes of like how abuse, like mental, emotional, and spiritual abuse can affect people. So hopefully if you pick up a copy, you'll be able to find something to resonate with in these characters, but I mostly wrote it as just a fun adventure. So if nothing else, at least hopefully you'll get that. So thank you again for everybody for showing up here. And thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Jonathan. I hope that gives some of the aspiring writers out there some inspiration if you're thinking about self-publishing. That is definitely a viable route. Thank you so much. All right, so we have 2 more authors to go. Megan Lee is next. So London Clark is the pen name of the award-winning and Amazon bestselling author of Wildfell, The Neighbor, and the Legacy of Darkness series. Obsessed with vampires and haunted houses from a young age, Clark grew up reading Gothic tales like Wuthering Heights and Dracula, featuring romance, tragedy, and tortured souls. She considers herself a recovering runaway and confesses that she once relocated to England in search of a man who was the perfect amalgamation of Dracula, Hamlet, Heathcliff, and Mr. Rochester. Clark graduated from George Mason University with a bachelor's in music and master's in creative writing. She's had an eclectic array of jobs, including receptionist, legal secretary, literary assistant, high school English school teacher, and freelance editor. Clark now lives in South Carolina with her husband and 2 Italian greyhounds. She's happiest when she's writing novels, reading books, or sampling wine at one of her favorite restaurants. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored that I was chosen to be part of this today. And it's been fantastic to hear from all of the other panelists and what they're doing. I just recently moved to South Carolina from Virginia this past summer, but I've spent a lot of time in the Greenville area since 2012. So upstate South Carolina kind of feels like home to me. Although several of my books are set in Virginia and 1.5 books are set in Asheville and 1 in New Orleans. But I'm working my way to Greenville as a setting eventually. And my books are sort of a strange little niche. I mean, they fall somewhere in between Gothic suspense, supernatural thrillers, paranormal, and horror. But I like to think that I also go beyond the basic genre and create characters who are real people with real problems. I've also been accused of crossing genres, since I usually have a little domestic or psychological thriller and some adventure, some romance in the books as well. I used to write women's fiction and historical fiction under my real name, but the spooky, scary books are really what I've always wanted to write. So when I made the decision to completely switch my genre, I knew that that meant a complete shift in audience too. I didn't want someone expecting a historical romance and then be traumatized by vampires and ghosts. So I decided to use a pen name, and I've been writing as London Clark since 2018. I have 6 books so far. There was another one coming out in the spring. So I thought today I would address a question I get a lot, which is how I get the ideas for the stories and then how I sleep at night after writing them. A lot of the ideas for these books come from true stories. I read a lot of accounts of people who have lived in houses with paranormal activity. And then I watch Travel Channel shows. You know, I'm sure people know what those types of shows about the same thing. They're usually great inspiration for me. They usually spark a sort of big concept or a big idea, a big picture concept to get me started. Of course, everyone knows there's this theory that writers are either pantsers, they're plotters, meaning, you know, that you either fly by the seat of your pants while you're writing, or you plot out every twist and turn before you start writing. And then there are those of us in between. And so I have a vague idea where I'm going when I start out, but I rarely know how it's going to end. And then about 6 or 7 chapters in, I get frustrated and I try to plot it out. And then I get frustrated again and I do more pantsing. So it's a seesaw process that somehow gets me to the end of the book. But the scary parts of my book do not keep me up at night at all, surprisingly. But what does keep me up at night is an approaching deadline that forces me to finish something faster than I'd like, or if I think the book is terrible and the worst thing I've ever written. Those are the things that really keep me up at night. And the latter part was sort of what happened with the book, The Neighbor, which came out earlier this year, this one here. I actually wanted to quit several times while I was writing this book, especially near the end. My dad had just passed away and I had a deadline approaching when I thought I had to get the book in to meet pre-order requirements. And ultimately the book started out as one thing and it ended up as something totally different from what I imagined. So I thought, this might be the book I disown. This may be the one that I just, take my name off of it altogether. But amazingly, it has actually been the book that many readers write me and tell me it's their favorite and that it was the most terrifying thing they'd ever read, which makes me so happy. I love it when I hear that from people. So I guess I hit the mark and didn't even realize it on that. So you just never know. And going forward, I really just want to keep writing quality fiction. I want to keep my readers happy and give them what they want. I do have a website. It's londonclark.com. If anyone wants to check out the website and the books there, sign up for my newsletter. And again, I just really, really thank you for the opportunity to speak here today.
Thank you so much. Again, another great insight into the writing process and how one thing you think you're writing can turn into something completely different. So there's hope out there if you're finding you've lost your path and you're writing something. And last but not least, Lee Statham, also published as Gwen Holt, was raised in the wilds of rural Idaho, but now resides in North Carolina and has an MFA in Young Adult Literature from Commerce College. She's the winner of the James Applewhite Poetry Prize Honorable Mention and Southeast Review Narrative Nonfiction Prize. She published her 5th YA novel, Girls of War, with Owl Hollow Press in March of 2021. Her essays, poetry, and short stories can be found in the Remington Review, Southeast Review, North Carolina Literary Review, and several anthologies. Thank you for joining us, Lee.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been really great. I am so glad and happy to be here and to hear all these stories and how all of you are inspired and writing. It's really great. I think the pandemic has kind of taken a pretty big toll on all of us creative folks. So it feels really great to be doing this. Like I'm almost at a conference in person again, which I really miss doing. So I'm Lee Statham, and I right now am focusing on these books. The Daughter, let's see if I can make it work. My camera's crazy. Oh, there you go. Daughter 4254 series. There's a trilogy, and I really love the covers that my publisher did for these books. This is Girls of War. And I'm really, really happy with how they turned out. So let me back up a little bit. I love history and I study it for fun. I love watching the History Channel. I love reading. I love like the crazy things that people do and the crazy things that they do over and over again, especially like world leaders, right? I remember reading about Mao and the Cultural Revolution in China and just saying, how did that actually happen? And then when I moved here to Raleigh, I've always kind of been a writer. I've always dabbled in poetry and short stories my whole life. I have journals from when I was a little kid, but when I moved here to Raleigh, I saw on the news that they were canceling the arts funding for elementary schools across Wake County. And that just broke my heart because I'm also a musician. And my mother was an artist, a fine artist, and I have an undergrad degree in fine art as well. And just the idea that they were canceling funding for the arts altogether completely. They just said, well, the schools, if they want it, the PTAs will get the money together to pay for it. And I really was like, where have I moved to? Like, what is going on here that they're canceling funding for the little children, right? Like, and that led me to start thinking like, what if? All of my books are based on what ifs. Like, what if this happened nationwide? What if this happened worldwide? This is actually what happened in China not so long ago, and it's happened in other countries. So from there, of course, I jumped into a dystopian universe because what is life without art and music and color for our hair and our walls and our clothes? And that's where I came up with Daughter 4254. And it started with that idea of what if this became a law and we were living in this society? And of course, I was right on the tail end. Well, it was before the Hunger Games came out. Like, and these juices were stirring in my head, but I love dystopian fiction. I think the Hunger Games is kind of like this pinnacle series that everybody recognizes and knows about, but dystopian fiction goes all the way back to, I believe they think Gulliver's Travels is the first actual like book that can be considered dystopian, which I find really interesting, and you can follow there's tons of other authors. So I'm like right in the mix of all that, I was working on this book and I was having babies and like teaching violin lessons and just writing whenever I could. It ended up taking me 10 years to get my book published. So it started before all the dystopian stuff got exciting and everyone was hot for it. And then it finished after, like, and then they're like, well, you can't, no one wants to buy dystopian, no one wants to read that. But honestly, I'm in the camp that there will always be a place for dystopian literature as long as humans are humans. So I went ahead and wrote it. And then I was very, very lucky to be picked up by Alhalla Press to work with them. I have an earlier series that was also based on historical fiction, but my books get so far out there that you can't really call them historical fiction. My other series is about the girls who immigrated from France to Canada in the 1650s through an actual social program that they had set up. But I'm researching this and writing about it, and I'm not like Emily, like I don't really want to know what they ate for dinner. I just want to know, how did they get there? Like, what were they thinking? So I turned that into a steampunk adventure. So I was able to like capture the history and the craziness of these political decisions that were made and the girls that were affected, but then without having to worry about getting the corsets right. And I really enjoyed doing that. So my writing happens in my head. I plot and I plan and I do all of my character development in my head while I'm washing dishes and driving and grading papers. I probably should focus more while I'm grading papers, but I can't really help it. I've always been the kid who was like staring out the window. And then when I finally get time, I sit down and I write really fast. I love NaNoWriMo. I've done that several times. I don't know if any of you have done that before, but I love it because I'm like, oh no, it's November. I get like 2 hours every night to write so I can meet my goal, and then my family leaves me alone and it's all good. But so I do a lot of thinking. I do a lot of scribbling in notebooks, and then I sit down, I put it all out. Then I send it to my wonderful beta readers and my publisher and my agent, and then they help me like clean it up and make it better. Right now, I've got a novel in verse that's out being shopped around. We'll see where that lands. I'm really excited about it. It deals with homelessness in Southern California and the teens there and just the life of a teen on the street in Southern California. And then I've also got a middle grade fantasy that's almost ready to go out. So I've been jumping genres a little bit, but if you like dystopian, my dystopian books are available. And if you love the arts and care about them, then this might be a good read for you.
Thank you, Lee. Wow, I have just been so impressed with all of the authors who have spoken today. Thank you for your fantastic introductions to your work. What a great group we have, really established authors, first-time authors, and everybody in between. This has just been very inspirational for me, and I'm sure for everyone in the chat. And boy, has the chat been blowing up. We have so many questions. So we're gonna hop right into the question time. So authors, if you'll be prepared, we're going to be asking some questions to all of you, and we'll also be asking some questions to specific authors. So first up is a question to everyone, and that is, what are your favorite and least favorite things about being an author?
I can say I'm very indecisive. So I write with emotion and I have a lot of imagination. So I have a stack of papers at least this big of ideas, and it's very hard to narrow anything down to begin, because as soon as I want to begin, I'm off on something else. So that is definitely one of the harder things, but it is also that same exact thing as one of the best things, that I can use my imagination and my emotion to write about any and everything and just see where it lands.
For me, it's just seeing the reaction of people reading my words. That is probably the most profound and fulfilling piece, to see their reactions to it and what they say.
I love the process. I love everything from like I love imagining. I love, getting things on paper or virtual paper, a keyboard and seeing it out. I even like the editing process. I like all of that. I think the most challenging part is once you have the book done, like doing the marketing, because there's so much information out there and everybody's like, oh, here's the one quick trick to marketing. You have to be on social media. And I'm like, okay, well, let me try that. And all of the things that they suggest take so much time that you're like, I literally don't have this many hours in a day. So it's a matter of like finding out what works best. Like, is social media where I need to be doing? Do I need to be doing advertisements that are more traditional? Part of that is just the juggling and just like the little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit there. Whereas with writing, you just, I can immerse myself and just get right in there and focus and concentrate, and it's great. And when you're doing marketing, it feels like you're flitting about and trying to figure out what you're doing. But I don't dislike it. It's just more of a challenge, and it's a completely different way of thinking than it is when you're doing the writing itself.
Yeah, my answer is probably about the same as Emily's. I love the writing process and hate marketing. I am just terrible at sales, as it turns out. So, and that is especially a problem as a self-published author, because you're literally doing all of it yourself. But hopefully that is something that I will get better at as time goes on and I do more of it, but still not something I enjoy, really.
With me, just getting off in that world in my mind, that little fantasy world, and creating all this stuff, and the really fun parts when the character does something you didn't expect them to do and they just kind of take over. I love that part of the writing process, but it's the social media, I think, that's the toughest for me too. So I'm right in there with you, y'all, because I can do it, but it takes a lot of time. So I'm having to pick and choose what makes the most sense.
It's the adage, it's the journey, not the destination, because when you're writing, you're creating. And when you're creating, you learn a lot of tangential, a lot of things that are not intended, but you learn a lot of other things while you in the process of the journey. So to me, it's the journey, and to see the baby born, that is the icing on the cake.
Yeah, I really like the whole creative process because I do writing and illustration. And so the whole thing is like, what is this going to be like when I'm done? I can hardly wait to find out, because you never really know. Like some of you mentioned, like, you don't know what your characters are going to do. You don't know what the next thing is that's going to happen. So that's the funnest part of all of it.
Much of what I've written, which didn't have to do with this particular book, has to do with what I've researched. And I really like the research process, because oftentimes there's a question, oftentimes you don't know if you're going down a rabbit hole or if you're on your way to a gold mine. And I think that just finding out at the end which one was it is the interesting part of the process for me. So I think I really enjoy the research part. The writing part is an essential part, because you can't really explain the research unless you write about it. And then it's trying to write about it in a way that people can understand it.
These are all great comments. And for those aspiring writers who need to learn more about research, I think you know the place to go. That's the library. And librarians can help you in all of your research quests. So shameless plug. I'll move on to our next question. This one is specifically for Lanice. The question is, Dr. McFall was a highly respected and deeply committed citizen working to improve health, labor, education, and racial inequities in Charleston. What causes do you think he would champion if he were alive today?
Oh, great question. I think it would be the same things. I think that one of the things that I guess it shouldn't be amazing, but it always is that the same problems that we are facing today are the same problems that he was facing at the time. They may have some slight differences, but one of the panelists talked about not saying that, oh, we need to be more respected. We need to respect people more and treat people with dignity. Well, that was the problem that he faced. If someone came into his store and didn't want to did not want to address him as Dr. McFall or Mr. McFall, and he had to tell the guy to turn around and just leave his store because he wasn't there. So I think that health, education, being an advocate for one's community, the problems are all the same.
Thank you. You can always see the similarities from different time periods, certainly.
Mhm.
The next question is for both Barbara and Tim. Would you say that the animals in your books are scientifically accurate from like their appearance, habitats, eating habits, that sort of thing, and anyone else who's written about animals?
You want to go first, Tim?
Go ahead, Barbara.
Okay. I know a lot about giraffes. So I do incorporate a good bit. I mean, I actually have a research textbook on giraffes. It's been highlighted and everything, and I follow everything you can find about giraffes. That said, I made them telepathic. I also gave them some other aspects that are fantastical. So, but I will tell you the telepathy part of the giraffe actually came from an early part of research on giraffes when they were trying to figure out how giraffes communicate, because they actually communicated a decibel we can't hear. So researchers a while back thought that there was a telepathic ability to communicate. And I tapped into that, and then later they found out, no, they actually do have sound. But anyway, but I try to. And in my next book, we're actually going to be doing wolves, and I've been doing a lot of research on wolves. So I try to keep as much of it scientifically accurate while adding the fantastical.
Yeah, I would agree that I try to make everything in the same vein that animal would do. Now, my animals talk, they interact in ways that humans do, but even the way they talk, the kind of things that they do, the kind of things that they eat, I want it to be all pretty accurate to the way those animals are, because it makes it more fun. They're actually like those animals and kind of like humans too. So I try to keep it as accurate as you can and still make it humanized, I guess you'd say, which is kind of, I guess, what you're doing. But one thing that's always an issue is like, should animals ever wear clothes or not? Especially when they're humanized. I've done it both ways. And what I'm doing in this book I'm working on now is a clash of the cultures of the animals who do wear clothes from Great Britain and the animals who don't, who live on the island. And it's one of the many clashes of cultures that they have to work out. So it's the first time I've ever had to deal with that in a book, but it should be fun.
I love that. That's great. All right, we've got another question for the entire group. This relates to a couple of audience questions that have come in related to writer's block and that sort of thing. For the group, do you have any writing rituals or habits to help you get your creativity flowing?
I'll just say coffee.
I think for me, I am terrified of a blank page. Like that just gives me anxiety. So as soon as I open up a document, I just throw stuff at the document, like ideas, words, sentences, whatever. And then that's no pressure because I'm not writing, I'm not writing my actual thing. I'm just taking notes. And what happens is most of my writing is actually just taking my notes, rearranging them and putting them in like grammar. And like, I'll have conversations where it's just what people say. And then I go and put the quotation marks in and the little, like he said, and the beats and the descriptions. So for me, my process is don't look at a blank screen, throw every idea you have. And so I have a program where I can keep all my notes organized. So like this happens in this scene, this happens in this scene, and then I mix and match. And so that's how I do it because I don't like a blank page. So I just keep, very low bar of entry in terms of like what counts as something I can throw on the page. And then I've got something to work with and I just clean it up.
I was just going to briefly say that I agree with Emily. You have to give yourself permission not to write the final draft the minute you sit down. And the second brief point is you have to give yourself permission to take the time to do it. I often wait until the very last part of the day because I've given everything else priority. Forget it, doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that's really true because there's a lot of times that I'm working on something and I think, oh, this is just so bad, but I have to just say, you know what, this is the first draft. The first draft, I have to remind myself of that constantly. It's going to be bad. But also I have a specific time of day and place that I write. So I get up and I write first thing in the morning. That's just my usual schedule, really early. That's my thinking time. And I write in one spot. And so that's kind of my ritual. And coffee, absolutely coffee. There's nothing that happens without that.
Mine's hot tea.
I'm seeing a trend, caffeinated beverage.
I was just going to say that I like all those suggestions and agree with all of them. I think the important thing is to find something it's all about comfort. So coffee, PJs. I try not to limit when I sit down to write, like a time of day, because I'm a mom of two and they're 6 and 7, and that's leaves me this much time in the day for myself, but really taking that extra step to make time for yourself and to make yourself as super comfortable as you can, because then your ideas will start flowing, and they will. I mean, I'm scared of a blank page, but I also allow a blank page to help me write.
I would say for me, I keep a notepad in my car, near my bed. And it sounds a bit old school because it's low tech, but every time I have a thought and a note, I write those things down. So whenever I write, then I can capture and codify that and keep the stories and the imagery going. So I think that way I don't lose those ideas that come to you, whether you're driving, whether you're in the kitchen, whether you're, at work. I think it's just important to write those notes down.
I would agree with that, John. I do that a lot myself. But what I've done is when I'm done with my book, I look back at those notes and see how far I've departed from them, which is also kind of fun.
Yeah.
My fuel is dark chocolate, usually from Aldi's, so which is probably caffeinated enough.
These are all great tips. Right, let's go to another question then. This is a lot for the fantasy authors, but perhaps everyone. What fairy tales, mythologies, fables, stories have inspired you the most? What themes do they tell that are important for people of any era to learn?
My next series is somewhat of a play on an adult version of Red Riding Hood. So that's going to come into play. And it's a long step. It's like you take Red Riding Hood and you take an adult version of Hogwarts, and there's this whole magical system called the Enchanters and everything, and the Spirit Wolves are part of that. But as far as my the things that have inspired me as a kid, I read probably multiple times a year. I would pull out of the library The Princess and the Goblin. I loved that book. Loved that book. And it just always stuck with me. And I don't know, I've always liked the different fairy tales, so I'm sure a lot of aspects come into them. Somebody wrote a review on Watch the Menai and compared it to Cinderella. I didn't see that one, but I kind of get their point. So I think about any fantasy, you can pull any other story, because there's only 7 storylines, right? And relate to it somehow.
For me, I feel like my inspiration process is I just read a lot. And it's kind of like that little computer game where you have the little worm and then you eat something and then it gets longer and then you eat something else. And that's what my fantasy research ends up being. And I just keep pulling all these ideas along and they all get mixed up. And sometimes I'm like, I don't know where I got that idea from, but I'm going to stick it here. So I do have some things that are particularly flavored. Like I've got a Celtic inspired fairy forest. So I pulled in some of those Celtic, don't trust the fairies, don't follow the fairies. There's that aspect of it. I've got some I've got some Anglo-Saxon stuff, because for a while I was taking classes on Anglo-Saxons because of my degree. And I was like, well, now that's in the book because I found that interesting. I found, you know, again, some research on like Timbuktu and like some of the West African civilizations from, I just found that really interesting and just sort of pulled a whole bunch of things in. And so for me, it's whatever's interesting, whatever piques my interest. And I just love reading. I love reading nonfiction. I love reading about cultures and people. And it's just sort of like, I just keep swallowing more things and it just keeps getting longer and longer. And it makes for interesting stories, I hope. But that's how I do it. I just keep reading.
I don't write fantasy, but I would agree with what she just said. Since coming to South Carolina, I've delved deeply into South Carolina history. And to tell you the truth, I've stopped reading fiction because South Carolina history is just so unbelievable and amazing that if I were to write fantasy or fiction, you could just start with South Carolina history, and you could just stay in the state and just use that for character and events, because it's really quite it is quite something. It's just an amazing thing. So that's what I would say, not being a fantasy writer.
Thank you. Yes, any suggestion that includes reading more, you know, a librarian is going to be a fan of. So I sign off on that. I see that our time is running short, so we will just ask another question. We do want to value everyone's time, of course, but we did have one specific question for Andrea. Did you have any professionals in mental health work with you as you wrote and published the book? Will you continue writing in this niche, or would you consider including other professionals?
That is a great question, and thank you for asking that. Is joke that we are psychologists, doctors, like every profession you can think of, we are all that combined into one. And the story, like we are there to help each other, to support each other mentally, emotionally. And a lot of the ideas that I got for this book and others, hint, hint, that are coming out, take place from accumulating things that have happened in the education world that did not only happen in like my class with my students, but across the board. So I've gotten help from teachers in the younger grades and the older grades, this school psychologist. I did ask for help with and some assistance. I am someone who likes to ask a lot of questions. So I did get a lot of support from family and friends. And so I did, to answer your question, get a lot of help from the education community. I do intend the books that I'd like to write are books that lots of children will find relatable. Maybe not that one particular incident happening in a book, but just in general, I want any student in any grade to go, hey, I get it. That happened to me at some point. Whether it is just a book that gives support or a book that helps boost confidence. Like I said earlier, just find your inner awesomeness that all kids have. And I want my books to convey that. So I'm always looking for help. I'm always looking for people to collaborate with.
Wonderful. Well, again, time has run out on us. We so appreciate all of the wonderful questions in the chat. I'm just so sorry we couldn't get to all of them. We do have one last quick one that I think all of the authors could say just a blurb about. What book or genre do you find particularly inspiring personally? And we'll just go through that very quickly and then we'll close out for the night.
Hey, I'll say for me, it's history. History is so important, especially now.
I'll echo that. I second that motion.
I third that motion.
I'm an eclectic reader. So I read a little bit of everything, but it tends to be more on the fiction side. So I like history, but if it's fictional history, or if it's nonfiction, I like it in story form, but I read a little bit of everything.
I'm going to agree with you, Barbara. I always switch back and forth between fiction and nonfiction because they both have something to bring to the way we tell stories. But I read all genres. I can't even think of one that I don't read.
I agree. I'm very eclectic. I've always been that way. So whatever's going to help me help anybody out there. And I think that by being eclectic, that could help anybody who likes all the different genres to find a little bit of that book very insightful.
Like I said, I like to read about different cultures and history and stuff like that. I also really like hard science fiction where it's like, hey, maybe this could actually happen. I don't know why I like that, but it's super cool. It has nothing to do with my writing, but I really enjoy it.
I agree with John and Denise about history because I think life is stranger than fiction.
I love stories about people. I love reading memoirs, biographies. Those are probably some of my favorite things to read, and I always get inspiration for characters from those stories.
I'm very much a fantasy reader as well as writer. Right now, I'm working my way through Terry Pratchett's Discworld series, so that's where my heart is right now.
I love to read everything as well. I love biographies, fiction. I read everything. I think that I'm in the history boat though right now. I think my heart is stuck in the past and just gathering up all the craziness, like I said, that's repeating itself, especially.
I'm reading mostly history, but there's so much great scholarship going on now, which is going back and analyzing material. And so I can't, that's pretty much where I am. And biography, reading about a person and then spreading out and seeing more of what their time was like, or vice versa, reading about the time and then seeing who actually lived in that time.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I hope that you, the viewers, have been inspired to read something new. We've heard from so many wonderful different authors about different genres, their different books. You've got so many to choose from. Thank you so much, authors, for your time. You have inspired us in so many ways today, whether you were writing from your personal experience or creating something amazing out of your mind. We so appreciate what you do and that you share your craft and your talent with all of us. So thank you. Thank you for your time. Viewers, I hope you've been inspired to participate in the Winter Reading Challenge so you can read some of these new books and sign up for that challenge today. Also, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter so you don't miss any of these other wonderful opportunities and Meet the Author events we have coming up in the future. We have had some people ask in the chat if they can keep asking questions to the authors. So authors have contact information on their websites. That's in the video description, and it's also been in the chat today. Authors, if you wanted to post anything else in the chat, feel free to do so before we wrap up. But thank you all for coming. Thank you for attending this library event, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.